Buddhism and God. Is Buddhism truly atheistic? Discover the truth now. Quite contradictory views have been expressed in Western literature on the attitude of Buddhism toward the concept of God and gods. From a study of the discourses of the Buddha preserved in the Pali canon, it will be seen that the idea of a personal deity, a creator God conceived to be eternal and omnipotent, is incompatible with the Buddha's teachings. On the other hand, conceptions of an impersonal godhead of any description, such as world soul, etc., are excluded by the Buddha's teachings on anatta, non-self, or unsubstantiality. In Buddhist literature, the belief in a creator God, issara-nimmana-vada, is frequently mentioned and rejected, along with other causes wrongly adduced to explain the origin of the world, as, for instance, world soul, time, nature, etc. God belief, however, is placed in the same category as those morally destructive wrong views which deny the kammic results of action, assume a fortuitous origin of man and nature, or teach absolute determinism. These views are said to be altogether pernicious, having definite bad results due to their effect on ethical conduct. Theism, however, is regarded as a kind of kamma teaching insofar as it upholds the moral efficacy of actions. Hence, a theist who leads a moral life may, like anyone else doing so, expect a favorable rebirth. He may possibly even be reborn in a heavenly world that resembles his own conception of it, though it will not be of eternal duration as he may have expected. If, however, fanaticism induces him to persecute those who do not share his beliefs, this will have grave consequences for his future destiny. For fanatical attitudes, intolerance, and violence against others create unwholesome kamma, leading to moral degeneration and to an unhappy rebirth. Although belief in God does not exclude a favorable rebirth, it is a variety of eternalism, a false affirmation of permanence rooted in the craving for existence, and as such an obstacle to final deliverance. Among the fetters, samyojana, that bind to existence, theism is particularly subject to those of personality belief, attachment to rites and rituals, and desire for fine material existence, or for a heaven of the sense sphere, as the case may be. As an attempt at explaining the universe, its origin, and man's situation in his world, the God idea was found entirely unconvincing by the Buddhist thinkers of old. Through the centuries, Buddhist philosophers have formulated detailed arguments refuting the doctrine of a creator God. It should be of interest to compare these with the ways in which Western philosophers have refuted the theological proofs of the existence of God. But for an earnest believer, the God idea is more than a mere device for explaining external facts like the origin of the world. For him, it is an object of faith that can bestow a strong feeling of certainty, not only as to God's existence somewhere out there, but as to God's consoling presence and closeness to himself. This feeling of certainty requires close scrutiny. Such scrutiny will reveal that in most cases, the God idea is only the devotee's projection of his ideal, generally a noble one, and of his fervent wish and deeply felt need to believe. These projections are largely conditioned by external influences, such as childhood impressions, education, tradition, and social environment, charged with a strong emotional emphasis, brought to life by man's powerful capacity for image formation, visualization, and the creation of myth. They then come to be identified with the images and concepts of whatever religion the devotee follows. In the case of many of the most sincere believers, a searching analysis would show that their God experience has no more specific content than this. Yet the range and significance of God belief and God experience are not fully exhausted by the preceding remarks. The lives and writings of the mystics of all great religions bear witness to religious experiences of great intensity, in which considerable changes are effected in the quality of consciousness. Profound absorption in prayer or meditation can bring about a deepening and widening, a brightening and intensifying of consciousness, accompanied by a transporting feeling of rapture and bliss. The contrast between these states and normal conscious awareness is so great that the mystic believes his experience to be manifestations of the divine. And given the contrast, this assumption is quite understandable. Mystical experiences are also characterized by a marked reduction or temporary exclusion of the multiplicity of sense perceptions and restless thoughts, and this relative unification of mind is then interpreted as a union or communion with the one God. All these deeply moving impressions and the first spontaneous interpretations the mystic subsequently identifies with his particular theology. It is interesting to note, however, that the attempts of most great Western mystics to relate their mystical experiences to the official dogmas of their respective churches often resulted in teachings which were often looked upon askance by the orthodox, if not considered downright heretical. The psychological facts underlying those religious experiences are accepted by the Buddhist and well known to him, but he carefully distinguishes the experiences themselves from the theological interpretations imposed upon them. After rising from deep meditative absorption, jhana, the Buddhist meditator is advised to view the physical and mental factors constituting his experience in the light of the three characteristics of all conditioned existence: impermanency, liability to suffering, and absence of an abiding ego or eternal substance. This is done primarily in order to utilize the meditative purity and strength of consciousness for the highest purpose, liberating insight. But this procedure also has a very important side effect which concerns us here. The meditator will not be overwhelmed by any uncontrolled emotions and thoughts evoked by his singular experience and will thus be able to avoid interpretations of that experience not warranted by the facts. Hence, a Buddhist meditator, while benefiting by the refinement of consciousness he has achieved, will be able to see these meditative experiences for what they are, and he will further know that they are without any abiding substance that could be attributed to a deity manifesting itself to the mind. Therefore, the Buddhist conclusion must be that the highest mystic states do not provide evidence for the existence of a personal God or an impersonal godhead. Buddhism has sometimes been called an atheistic teaching, either in an approving sense by freethinkers and rationalists, or in a derogatory sense by people of theistic persuasion. Only in one way can Buddhism be described as atheistic, namely, insofar as it denies the existence of an eternal omnipotent God or Godhead who is the creator and ordainer of the world. The word atheism, however, like the word godless, frequently carries a number of disparaging overtones or implications, which in no way apply to the Buddha's teaching. Those who use the word atheism often associate it with a materialistic doctrine that knows nothing higher than this world of the senses and the slight happiness it can bestow. Buddhism is nothing of that sort. In this respect, it agrees with the teachings of other religions that true lasting happiness cannot be found in this world, nor, the Buddha adds, can it be found on any higher plane of existence, conceived as a heavenly or divine world, since all planes of existence are impermanent and thus incapable of giving lasting bliss. The spiritual values advocated by Buddhism are directed not towards a new life in some higher world, but towards a state utterly transcending the world, namely nibbana. In making this statement, however, we must point out that Buddhist spiritual values do not draw an absolute separation between the beyond and the here and now. They have firm roots in the world itself, for they aim at the highest realization in this present existence. Along with such spiritual aspirations, Buddhism encourages earnest endeavor to make this world a better place to live in. The materialistic philosophy of annihilationism, issara-nimmana-vada, is emphatically rejected by the Buddha as a false doctrine. The doctrine of karma is sufficient to prove that Buddhism does not teach annihilation after death. It accepts survival, not of an eternal soul, but of a mental process subject to renewed becoming. Thus, it teaches rebirth without transmigration. Again, the Buddha's teaching is not a nihilism that gives suffering humanity no better hope than a final, cold nothingness. On the contrary, it is a teaching of salvation, niyyanika dhamma, or deliverance, vimutti, which attributes to man the faculty to realize by his own efforts the highest goal, nibbana, the ultimate cessation of suffering and the final eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion. Nibbana is far from being the blank zero of annihilation, yet it also cannot be identified with any form of God idea, as it is neither the origin nor the immanent ground or essence of the world. Buddhism is not an enemy of religion as atheism is believed to be. Buddhism indeed is the enemy of none. A Buddhist will recognize and appreciate whatever ethical, spiritual, and cultural values have been created by God belief in its long and checkered history. We cannot, however, close our eyes to the fact that the God concept has served too often as a cloak for man's will to power, and the reckless and cruel use of that power, thus adding considerably to the ample measure of misery in this world supposed to be an all-loving God's creation. For centuries, free thought, free research, and the expression of dissident views were obstructed and stifled in the name of service to God. And alas, these and other negative consequences are not yet entirely things of the past. The word atheism also carries the innuendo of an attitude countenancing moral laxity, or a belief that man-made ethics, having no divine sanction, rest on shaky foundations. For Buddhism, however, the basic moral law is inherent in life itself. It is a special case of the law of cause and effect, needing neither a divine lawgiver nor depending upon the fluctuating human conceptions of socially conditioned minor moralities and conventions. For an increasing section of humanity, the belief in God is breaking down rapidly, as well as the accustomed motivations for moral conduct. This shows the risk of basing moral postulates on divine commandments when their alleged source rapidly loses credence and authority. There is a need for an autonomous foundation for ethics, one that has deeper roots than a social contract, and is capable of protecting the security of the individual and of human institutions. Buddhism offers such a foundation for ethics. Buddhism does not deny that there are in the universe planes of existence and levels of consciousness which in some ways may be superior to our terrestrial world and to average human consciousness. To deny this would indeed be provincial in this age of space travel. Bertrand Russell rightly says, "It is improbable that the universe contains nothing better than ourselves." Yet, according to Buddhist teachings, such higher planes of existence, like our familiar world, are subject to the law of impermanence and change. The inhabitants of such worlds may well be, in different degrees, more powerful than human beings, happier, and longer lived. Whether we call those superior beings gods, deities, devas, or angels is of little importance, since it is improbable that they call themselves by any of those names. They are inhabitants of this universe, fellow wanderers in this round of existence, and though more powerful, they need not be wiser than man. Further, it need not be denied that such worlds and such beings may have their lord and ruler. In all probability they do. But like any human ruler, a divine ruler too might be inclined to misjudge his own status and power, until a greater one comes along and points out to him his error, as our texts report of the Buddha. These, however, are largely matters beyond the range and concern of average human experience. They have been mentioned here chiefly for the purpose of defining the Buddhist position, and not to serve as a topic of speculation and argument. Such involvement can only divert attention and effort from what ought to be our principal object, the overcoming of greed, hatred, and delusion where they are found in the here and now. An ancient verse ascribed to the Buddha in the Questions of King Milinda says, "Not far from here do you need to look. Highest existence, what can it avail? Here in this present aggregate, in your own body overcome the world.